What of Seneca and modern philosophy? The latter, at least in the universities of the English-speaking world, has for some time been set on a course which he would certainly have condemned. He would not have understood the attention it pays to ordinary language. And some of his letters, for example, letter 48, make it clear that it would have come in for a share of his impatience with philosophers, not excluding Stoics, who in his eyes degraded philosophy by wasting their time on verbal puzzles or logical hair-splitting. But more than this, he would have denounced the opinion to which most philosophers, tacitly or otherwise, have come round in the last half-century, that it is no part of the business of philosophy to turn people into better persons, as tantamount to desertion or lèse majesté. His tremendous faith in philosophy as a mistress was grounded on a belief that her end was the practical one of curing souls, of bringing peace and order to the feverish minds of men pursuing the wrong aims in life. What we say should be of use, not just entertaining. Even speculation on the nature or meaning of the universe was of secondary importance, something which the philosopher might or might not, as he chose, take up in leisure moments. A philosopher's words should, as a Quaker might put it, speak to our condition. Fielding's observation that few people in the position of being overloaded with prosperity or adversity could be too wise or too foolish not to gain from reading Seneca might have gratified him not merely as an indication that his writings were proving of use to later generations, but also as showing that a philosopher could still be regarded as someone to be turned to for advice or consolation. To Seneca, as letter 90 and other letters plainly show, the philosopher and the wise man were the same person. Whether or not his letters may still be turned to for their pointers to the contented life, they cannot be read without noticing how far in advance of their time are many of his ideas. On the shows in the arena, for example, or the treatment of slaves. His implicit belief in the equality and brotherhood of man, despite all barriers of race or class or rank, was one resurrected from the days of the early Stoics, which led directly to great improvements in the legal position of slaves, besides explaining the then remarkable attitude towards slaves expressed in letter 47. The belief was also the germ of the notion of natural law, the law which was thought to transcend national boundaries and form a basis for the validity of international law. These elements of Stoicism made their not so small or indirect contribution to the French and American revolutions. Seneca and literature, his letters and other writings. Seneca, Quintilian tells us, turned his hand to practically everything which can be made the subject of study: speeches, poems, letters, dialogues, all surviving. Much of this is lost, including all his speeches, political and forensic, a biography of his father, and essays or treatises on marriage, superstition, and a variety of other subjects, mainly scientific. The works remaining to us, apart from brief poems or epigrams whose attribution to Seneca is sometimes doubtful, are of two main kinds. There are first the philosophical letters and essays, including treatises with such titles as The Happy Life, The Shortness of Life, Providence, Anger, Clemency, Problems in Natural Science, and literary consolationes to persons in bereavement. And secondly, there are the tragedies, probably never staged, and intended only for reading or recitation among a relatively small circle. The 124 letters to Lucilius comprise something entirely new in literature, for in these, which were his most conspicuous and immediate literary success, Seneca, if anyone, is the founder of the essay. As Francis Bacon put it to Prince Henry in the dedication of his own essays, the word is late, but the thing is ancient, for Seneca's epistles to Lucilius, if one mark them well, are but essays, that is, dispersed meditations, though conveyed in the form of epistles. The Epistulae Morales are essays in disguise. It has been said that they were real letters edited for publication. It seems most likely that they were intended from the first for publication, possibly preceded by an interval of private circulation. No replies have come down to us. The atmosphere varies from that of lively, not to say colloquial, conversation to that of the serious treatise. It is occasionally raised to higher levels, but generally remains informal. The teaching is generously eclectic. The first 30 letters each contain some quotation from or reference to writings of the main rival philosophical school, the Epicureans. The introduction of imaginary queries or objections, often scathing in tone, from the correspondent or another interjector, and the frequent and urgent exhortation of the listener to self-improvement suggest the atmosphere of the diatribe, while confidences about the writer's own character and the not uncommon choice of consolation or friendship as a theme serve to keep up the air of the letter. Personal happenings or surroundings are regularly made the occasion of, or the preliminary to, serious reflections in the abstract. There are also biting condemnations of ways of life around the writer, particularly among the bored and pleasure-seeking Roman aristocracy. Room is found, too, for culture, in an assimilable form, in balanced discussions of time-honored philosophical or ethical problems, or in the development of thoughts on, for example, poetry, or physical phenomena, or style. His style. Style, with Seneca, is of considerable importance. Notwithstanding his own condemnation of people who give less attention to what they have to say than how they will say it, he is a signal example of a writer to whom form mattered as much as content. In writers like him, in what has commonly been called the Silver Age of Latin literature, constant striving after terseness and originality of expression gave rise to an arresting and not easily digested style. There were reasons for the development of this pointed style. With the passing of the Republic and succession of a series of suspicious emperors, there had been a diminution both in the range of subject matter, which was safe, and in the practical value of a training in rhetoric for a career in public life. The leisured Roman, now increasingly over-leisured, turned his training to literary rather than political ends, and the means to the prime new end of stylistic brilliance were those of rhetoric. All this was encouraged by the fashion of giving public readings of one's work, in which success almost came to be measured by the ability of each and every sentence to win applause. Carried over, too, from the schools of rhetoric was a liking for sometimes daringly poetic words, especially from Virgil, and artificial forms of expression more typical of verse than prose. Going with the overriding aim of pithiness or epigrammatic brevity, contrasting so greatly with the style of Cicero a century before, was an indulgence in colloquialisms. Seneca's use of popular turns of phrase and everyday expressions, a practice rare in Roman authors not writing for the comic stage or on technical subjects, and deliberate cultivation of the easy conversational manner, are somehow reconciled with elements of style even in the letters, which to us seem highly wrought and polished. The exploitation of such figures as antithesis, alliteration, homoiotoleuta, and all manner of other plays upon words, paradox and oxymoron, apposition and asyndeton, the use of cases and prepositions in uncommon connotations, all contribute to the twin aims of brevity and sparkle. The result may read more naturally in Latin than it ever could in English, but is nonetheless apt to leave the reader dazzled and fatigued. All the wealth and ingenuity of epigram and illustration does not prevent us from feeling that the sentences often simply repeat the same thought, clothed in constantly different guises over and over again, as Fronto complained in the century following. And this reluctance, as it appears, to say what one has to say and then have done with it, instead of continuing the restless manufacture of yet bolder, more hard-hitting or more finished sentences or proverbs, sometimes arouses the impatience of more modern readers. There is Macaulay's celebrated statement in a letter to a friend. "I cannot bear Seneca. His works are made up of mottos. There is hardly a sentence which might not be quoted, but to read him straightforward is like dining on nothing but anchovy sauce." Quintilian considered that Seneca, whom by and large he respected and admired, weakened the force of his teaching by his manner of writing, and others have wondered whether his style is not unworthy of his subject. It is interesting to hear Quintilian speaking of his struggle to win his students away from such models as Seneca, who, he said, practically alone among authors was to be found on the shelves of every young man at that time. As an academician who stood for orthodoxy and a return to the older or Ciceronian manner, he could not bring himself to